district. We also have a few other agents that have collaborated to put this together. We have Justine Henderson, livestock agent in Central Kansas, Alicia Bohr in Cottonwood, she's the ag agent, and Laughlin is the livestock agent in Midway, and Sandy Johnson is the crops agent in Post Rock district. If you want to contact any of us, we each have our websites. You can Google any of those districts and ASU, you will find us. If you have any questions about using Zoom, you can email them to Sandy or any of us, Sandra Wick, at any time after the meeting or whenever. If you have any questions, we can certainly help you out on that. But if you have any questions, you'll see, depending on if you're on a phone or on your computer, there'll be a chat button in either case. Just click that and put in any questions or comments, anything you have for our presenters or for our agents today. We will be doing some polling questions during the presentation. So simply just click on your response. After we read the question, click on the response and we will show the results of that poll. As soon as everybody completes it, we'll give you about 30 seconds or so to complete those. I think we have 3 or 4 today throughout the presentation. And with that, we will introduce our speaker. Today we have Dr. Walter Fick. He's our a range management specialist for Kansas State Research and Extension. His overall goal of his program is an integrated approach of weed management, including grazing management with proper stocking rate combined with the use of prescribed burning. He evaluates new and current herbicides to develop effective methods or management strategies for brush and weed control on range, land, and pasture. And he's also done some research on musk thistle, common mullein, and Sericea lespedeza and Old World bluestem, some couple emerging weeds here in our area. So with that, I will stop sharing and let Walt share his slides, and I will hand it over to him.
Okay. So is that showing up?
We can see your slides. It's not on the presentation mode. There you go. Now we can see it.
Yeah. Well, good morning. Thanks for the invitation to visit with you today. They'd asked me to talk about kind of spring burning practices. I've gave a slightly different title here on planning, conducting a prescribed burn. And so we'll go through that, show you a picture of fire since that's what we're talking about. But we weren't able to conduct our prescribed burning schools this winter like normal because of the COVID situation, but give an opportunity to give you at least an overview of the basic principles and things we think about when we're going to conduct a prescribed burn. So here's an outline. Briefly going to cover, why we might want to burn. Going to emphasize safety and smoke management because those are key issues we deal with, and then actual planning and conducting the burn. So there's a large list of possible reasons we might want to burn, objectives or purposes for burning. This probably is not even all inclusive, but gives you an idea of the breadth of things we might want to burn for, rather than just making the soil black, I guess. Suppression of brush and weedy species is a key issue that many people deal with. Sometimes we may have had a pasture that it hasn't been used for a while and has a buildup of quite a bit of material, and we might just want to simply revitalize that site, remove the litter and so forth. In some cases, we can actually increase herbage yields, improve grazing distribution, and in the case of stockers, at least, we can increase livestock gains. So those are some of the key reasons we might want to burn here in Kansas. Here's a picture of one of our key species that we were dealing with. We've used eastern red cedar over the years, planting them in shelter belts, and unfortunately, they don't always stay there, get spread around by the birds. And fortunately, it's a species that is quite susceptible to prescribed burning, assuming you have enough fuel to carry the fire. And normally we can get, trees that are maybe up to 3 feet tall pretty easily. It takes more fuel if you're going to try to burn down bigger trees than that, however. So burning considerations, the first concern really ought to be safety, safety for our life, ourselves, properties. And then of course, hopefully we're doing a burn that it's going to effectively accomplish what we're trying to do. So safety, going to talk about it first. And there's personal and public safety, weather safety, proper conditions under which we want to conduct a burn. And then there are some special situations I'll bring to your attention as well. So personal safety primarily is from a health standpoint, and in individuals, if you have high blood pressure, heart conditions, maybe certain allergies because of the smoke, respiratory diseases, individuals like that probably shouldn't be out there on the active fire line. Sometimes as we get older, we get these conditions though, and we have had a lot of experience. And sometimes individuals like this can be still important in terms of helping us plan a burn. Another item of safety you want to talk about is the clothing that we wear when we burn. Usually clothes with natural fibers should be worn, cottons, for instance. Cover your arms, legs, your whole body, cover your head, wear gloves, boots or shoes, don't wear tennis shoes. Probably shouldn't even wear steel-toed boots because if you get close to fire, that can give you a hot foot. I say natural fiber clothing, but there are fire retardant clothing that you can buy that are actually synthetic materials, but they retard the fire. But just normal clothing we typically wear, like say 5% cotton is fine. Other item of personal safety would be involving communications. In the field, we want to be able to communicate with other individuals on our crew. These two-way radios. You get what you pay for, you can, but you can get fairly decent radios like this, even so $60, $80 a piece is a pretty decent radio. Now, if you're needing emergency contact though, then you're probably going to need somebody needs usually the fire boss ought to have a cell phone that he can call 911 or some other emergency number if he needs help during the burn. Other item of personal safety, we need to know basic firefighting and prescribed burning techniques. I've often said, maybe if you don't know how to put a fire out, maybe you shouldn't light one. And we also need to have, good equipment, make sure it's in working condition, and we have individuals that know how to operate it. Public safety, a key issue, and one of our state regulations. There's only about 4 of them really. And one of those though is notification. And, that may be, who do you notify? Well, each county is a little different. It may be the fire department, could be the police department. You may have an emergency office, that you contact. Usually you do that, let them know your intent to burn. But particularly, you call up as you're starting your burn then. And then I always think it's a good idea to call back when you're done, when you've seen the fires out and you're done. That way, if someone calls in and where you've been burning and maybe it's flared back up, they know that you thought you were done and they would know to respond. So I think it's important to notify, the authorities after you're done burning as well. Another issue along with the notification is we need to make sure the fire's extinguished before you leave. That's specifically stated in our regulations. What about night burning? Sometimes people think that's a time to do it because a lot of times maybe the winds go down, the humidities come up a little bit, lower temperatures. Maybe the fire's not quite as hot and volatile as it might be during sunlight hours. But from a safety standpoint, there's some real problems with burning at night. We can't see landmarks a lot of times. I don't know if you can see the picture. There's a windmill in the middle of that picture, for instance. Can't judge distances as well. When the ground is black, it's just hard to judge and see very well. Can't see to maneuver. Even individuals who may know their pasture have been known to go off into a little gully or something at night when you might get maybe a little excited because of the fire. But there's some issues with burning at night, and typically, you'll see fires, particularly here in the Flint Hills area. You'll see fires going after night. However, most of those were lit during the daytime, and they're burning fairly large acreages, and that continues into the evening hours. The other two things that are in our regulations, I mentioned the notification, ensuring the fire is out, and the other two deal with smoke, not creating safety hazards on roads or near an airport. Be a good neighbor. Think about your neighbor when you plan to do a burn. Hopefully, then you can pick a day when the wind's maybe blowing in a direction that doesn't smoke you or them out, because that can be an issue. Again, and then another thing about burning, and that where there's fire, there's going to be smoke, and the opposite of that's true too. Sometimes we see something's creating a little smoke. Maybe it's smoldering, through some litter on the ground or under trees, but there's that fire is still active, and of course smoke then is become a bigger issue for us. We're getting weekly reports now on the amount of acres being burned in the state of Kansas. This smoke management plan primarily relates to the Flint Hills, but it's an issue wherever you burn. So I want to talk a little bit about smoke, and here's from over a decade ago, but you look at this map of North America there, and it's kind of interesting. You see some fires down in April in Mexico and places like that, but the red on the maps, that's fires. So you can see in that particular date, eastern Kansas seems to be pretty well covered. The white on there then is the smoke plumes, and some of these travel considerable distances. There have been years when smoke out of Kansas gone clear to the Atlantic coast, so it does move. And this illustrates, though, on one day the smoke was kind of headed east. The next day, the wind shifted, and then the smoke from fires was headed the other direction. So we have to be aware, though, that those smoke plumes do indeed move around. We have, local issues with smoke, but then also can have an impact distance-wise. And, most years, and again, this date, that kind of second weekend of April, it seems to be a big time for a lot of people burning in Kansas. That seems to be the time when we have our most issues because of the amount of fire that's taking place. And, Lincoln and Omaha, Wichita, Kansas City on occasion, those are key places that have dealt with smoke issues in the past. So some things to talk about in terms of air quality and smoke. It can impact public health. Most of the emissions are actually carbon dioxide and water. The white that you see in the smoke is really is the water vapor part of it. But then also we can get formation of ozone, particularly on a bright sunny day with warmer temperatures. We can get ozone as a secondary product in the smoke. And then also these airborne particulates, particularly the PM 2.5 in size. And then you see some other hydrocarbons, the carbon monoxide, nitrous oxides. Those are all impact air quality. And then again, we get people traveling in the state or new to state, and then, they wonder what all this smoke is from, and it does cause accidents on occasion. Again, that's why it's important to try to keep it off of roads in particular, because it can obstruct visibility. Impacts of inhaling, that ozone, usually, again, respiratory related things. People may cough, irritated throat, discomfort in the chest, shortness of breath. It can have long-term effects on lungs, inflammation of the airway. So there's some serious issues that individuals might have to deal with in inhaling ozone. How do we minimize concerns with smoke? Well, there are some state guidelines that we could try to, of course, need to follow. Burn when conditions for dispersal are optimum. You can have some clouds, and I'll talk about that. You can have a few clouds in the atmosphere, but you don't want it to be a completely overcast day, because the clouds will trap that smoke and keep it closer to the soil surface, which causes those nearby issues. And then burn at a time when inversions are unlikely. Well, that's one of the reasons, again, we don't want to burn at night, frankly, is because inversions are more apt to occur at night than they do during the daytime. And we'll talk about, there's a mixing height that we also can look at, so that smoke goes up in the atmosphere and gets dispersed. Burn when the wind conditions take smoke away from your neighbors or other major population centers. I like to conduct these burns in the shortest time as I can, under safe conditions. It's kind of interesting, whenever you plan to burn, you may think it's going to take a couple hours. More than likely, it'll take longer than you expected. But, burn under safe weather conditions, which we'll talk about. So as you look at smoke, here's the impact of smoke with different wind speeds. And at 0 miles per hour, that smoke's going to go pretty much up in the atmosphere. It doesn't really even change much when we get to even the 10 miles per hour. It's still pretty much lifting up into the atmosphere, dispersing. But as that wind speed gets up to 20, 30 miles per hour, now you see that cloud of smoke is starting to lean, getting closer and closer to the ground. And at some point under high wind days, we've had wildfires here recently with 40, 50 mile an hour winds. Well, that smoke is right on the ground, and of course that's where it causes some serious issues with causing accidents and so forth because of lack of visibility. Where do we get, weather is a critically important aspect of conducting a prescribed burn, and we can get that information from lots of different sources, radio and television. They're usually giving you updates or whatever the current forecast is, maybe looking to give you information a few days out. The Weather Channel, I've used it in the past because it'll give hourly information in terms of temperature, wind speed, and direction. The best one, though, I think, is the National Weather Service. I have a link here, it's the weather.com, and it takes you to sites, and depending on which county you're in, it varies a little bit where your National Weather Service office is. If you're in Cloud, Ottawa, and Republic County, Topeka is the National Weather Service. If you're in states or counties, Ellsworth, Lincoln, Salina, Russell counties, then Wichita is actually your National Weather Service. And then Phillips, Smith, Jewell, Brooks, Osborne, Mitchell counties are in the north central part of the state. Then your actual National Weather Service is out of Hastings, Nebraska. But you can go to those. So you go to weather.gov and you get a map of the United States like this. This one actually is that was created for today. And you can see that the areas in red are actually red flag warnings because primarily because of high wind, low humidity, maybe even warmer temperatures, but still the vegetation is pretty well still dormant. So it really easily ignites. And those are the conditions under which we get red flag warnings. Those have been pretty common actually this here in the last month here in the state even. So then you get this map, you can just click on an area of the map where you're located. And when you do that, you go to those sites, usually under the forecast part of the menu, you'll have fire weather listed. So that's where you go. And then it takes a while to kind of learn how to navigate yourself around these sites, but there's lots of good information there. So here's one for Cloud County. I picked it. And this is actually, I did this last night. So today was actually Wednesday, yesterday, and then last night, and then Thursdays. So here's a forecast from this site for Cloud County, the Concordia area specifically. And you can see it gives you amount of cloud cover, no chance of precip, what the temperature is going to be, relative humidity. Again, see today it's relative 25 is getting pretty low for relative humidity. It gives you wind speed and direction. Again, I think the forecast I've seen for today is just kind of starting off here in the morning hours. It might be relatively low, but by later in the day, we're going to see some higher winds, and gusting. And this one also lists that mixing height I mentioned. And mixing height is important to look at from the smoke dispersal business. And we like to see a minimum of 1,800 feet for mixing height. Well, this one today is over 5,000 feet. So smoke dispersal under those conditions would have been excellent. Another thing you can find is I like this graph, and actually you can get it in a tabular form too. And this one starts at I set it up so it ran from 8 a.m. or so this morning. So the area in white is the daytime hours on April 1. And then, then it goes into the evening hours and are on the darker shade. So the top part of the graph that you see there, because I use my cursor here, this graph here at the top, this is temperature, how it fluctuates. And you can pick what weather parameters you want to use. I picked specifically temperature, wind, and relative humidity. So here during the day, over here on the left side here, again, I don't know if you read these bars, they point or into the direction of the wind. So those are, started off this morning, it says with easterly winds, but they're shifting to the south, pretty much staying under, this one says under 10 miles per hour. But then you notice tonight, and tomorrow, Friday night, now we got times when the wind is gusting there 20, 30 miles per hour. So those would be times, again, wouldn't be particularly good for controlling a fire. And then the lower graph there with the green line shows the relative humidity, how it fluctuates over time. So there's lots of good information on these weather sites. And again, you about need to go in there and spend a little time, but again, you look under forecast, every one of them has a fire weather page, and then you can start finding information like this that is useful to use for doing a burn. And this one allows, you can actually forward it a couple days ahead and see what the forecast is going to be. So you start planning ahead of time. Oh, the special situations I mentioned have to do with power lines, and most time I can't say I've necessarily seen this ever happen, which is a good thing. But one of the things can happen is you get smoke going underneath a power line actually can conduct electricity. And so, standing under a power line when there's burns taking place is not a good place to be, because this potentially could happen. Another situation, of course, you want to be careful. Most time our lines are up there high enough where you aren't going to come in contact with them, but you obviously don't want to do that. And then the other thing that could happen, if you have a down power line, it comes in contact with a wire fence, that conducts electricity a long way. I remember growing up, even from lightning storms, we're off in the distance, but they hit a fence line. We went out to the pasture, and there's some cattle that had been along that fence, and they actually died from coming in contact with electricity from that case lightning. But so those are some special situations to be aware of. Many times we don't have power lines out in our pasture, but occasionally we do. Or if not in the pasture, they might be down the edge of the road or so. So start talking about planning. We want to do the, plan before you burn. Here's some bunch of people standing around. There is some fire right there they lit. Sometimes we actually do that to just to see how the fire might react on a given day. But the point of this is, you want to plan before you go out there and drop those matches and start a fire. So some things to think about when we're planning to do a prescribed burn is you need to have a map. It could be an aerial photo or a map of some kind. And then I think it's important to inventory all the features on that map, that some of those that can be useful to you, and then some others might be hazards that exist in a pasture. Want to identify, features or areas you want to protect. Are there barriers in the pasture that prevent movement, whether it's gullies or wet spots or steeper slopes? You need to know where your gates are so you can get in and out of the pastures. Where are you going to build your fire guards? And then, then the opposite of that is, because usually the opposite direction from your fire guards is, where's the best site to light your head fires? And then you want to have your prescription defined in terms of those actual weather conditions you're going to follow or use when you conduct the burn. Wind is a critical issue for us, as I tried to point out already, and this is a graph or chart that was formed. And here in Kansas, at least we get into the springtime here, we're at the start of April now, most of the time, our prevailing winds are going to be out of the south or the southwest. You know, so if you have an area or pasture that because the road or something, maybe your road is on the west side of the pasture, or yeah, and maybe you want to have the smoke go away from that, so maybe you want a northwest wind. Well, they do occur, just that they aren't very frequently. I know we have a pasture here south of Manhattan that's on the east side of the 177, and of course we'd like to get an easterly breeze on that one. Well, again, that just doesn't happen very often. We want to keep smoke off that 4-lane highway, and usually when we get something with east, it means that precipitation is not too far behind. But so you got to kind of pick and choose sometimes to handle the direction you want your smoke to go. So here's a thing put together on an example. So here we have an area, maybe it's a CRP field. You know, it's got heavy fuel load and mulch in it, tall grass, and then around it we have these different things. And again, what we want to do then is talk about which ones are hazards and which ones might be helpful. Down here in the corner, you know, that's your house. It's got shake shingles on it. You don't want any sparks flying that direction. So here then I've looked at all these things on the map. There's a couple roads, you know, one on the south side and one on the east-west side there. Across the road, there's wheat stubble, and dried wheat stubble can carry a fire. His spark gets over there. Up the road, my nose here says culvert. Well, what's the problem with the culvert? Well, it goes underneath this road, and fires, you know, if you have trash and stuff, tends to build up in those culverts. If that happens to catch fire, sometimes it's just like you shot it through there and it goes to the other side. And on the other side of the road there's some native grass that's probably going to be burned. So those are indeed potential hazards. On the south side of the area, south and east side of the area we want to burn, here and over here, we can see there are areas that have, you know, vegetation on it, which probably would burn if fire would get across your area you want to burn. And even to the north side, there is a gate located over in this direction that might allow people to get in here if they needed to, and so forth. But the point of this, yeah, there are areas that are beneficial, and then some that could be a problem. You know, on the south side here, there is it's a gravel road there, but again, you know, probably if it's very heavily traveled, you aren't going to want to put smoke across it, or at least have some signs there indicating, you know, that there could be that issue. So we'll come back to, you know, how we deal with that. But in general, you know, that's the area we're going to burn. A southwest wind direction would be good in terms of taking away from the house and the gravel road and so forth. And the green would indicate areas that you probably would want to build some fire guards to help you maintain the fire where you want it to be. And again, we'll talk about actually process or procedure for lighting a fire. So when you get ready to do a prescribed burn, you know what you need to think about: safety, what those regulations are again that you have to deal with. For instance, now in each of your counties may be different, but does your county require a burn permit? Some counties do, some don't. Here in Riley, in Pottawatomie County, they're usually, well, Riley County is good for a year. So once I have that, I just need to call them up when I'm tending to burn. Some counties will give you a burn permit for the day that you're planning to burn. Some others, you know, you should notify somebody, again, whether that's the emergency management, fire chief, possibly the police department. But you need to know what those requirements are. So you're doing a burn, you know, how many people does it take, and do you have the equipment to conduct a burn? And again, up to a certain point, at least, more people is better than, you know, a person or two is difficult to burn safely under most situations if you only have a couple people. I'll mention this point. One of the things that you do have out in your area, there are prescribed burn associations. I know Jewell County has one, for instance. I think there's one in Russell County. But places like that, there are burn associations where people go together, you know, to conduct these burns. provide, that way you've got the extra labor and equipment to do them. Notification procedure, how and when you're going to do that, who again you're going to notify. Need to have contingency plan. Think about what's the worst case scenario. What could happen? What could go wrong? If something goes wrong there, this fire gets across this fence line, how am I going to deal with that? Do I have the equipment that maybe I can get on and do it myself, or do I need to contact and get some more help? Here are the prescriptions. I'm talking about you need to have a prescription. So the wind speeds we'd like to see are generally 5 to 15 miles per hour. Lighter winds, when you see a forecast that says, light variable winds, those are just not good conditions under which to conduct a burn, because they're just too variable. We don't know how the fire is going to react. But if it's out of a, steady out of a given direction, in that 5 to 15 miles an hour, generally those are good conditions under which we can control the burn. Again, I mentioned cloud cover a little bit before. We don't want it completely covered. Something up that 60, 70% is okay. One of the things that does is, though, again, allows the smoke to still disperse, but also can help reduce temperatures. If you're burning, on a warmer day, it gets hotter, again, we get temperature here, maybe up to 80 degrees. That's starting getting 75, 80 degrees or above. Fires are move much faster. Things burn hotter. So having a little cloud cover can help reduce that. Minimum ceiling there again, and then I'll mention again the mixing height, which I don't have on here, but that mixing height should be, something greater than 1,800 feet. Temperature, 55 to 80 degrees. That's an optimum. That's a comfortable temperature for us to work under. You can burn under cooler conditions than that. I've burned when it was like 45 to 50, worked fine. But you can't get too cold, because there's something called wind chill, and you start dropping, if it gets below, let's say 40 degrees, and you got some wind chill, and maybe you're traveling down a road, and you get to the side and you notice you got icicles forming in some of your hoses or water, wherever you have water. So it can be too cold. And like I say, if it gets too hot, then it becomes more uncomfortable for us. We might get tired quicker. But again, the fire behavior is more difficult to deal with, and it gets too warm. Relative humidity, 40 to 70%. Generally, that's not an issue, but I've seen as we go west in this state, relative humidity might be just as important or more important than wind speed in terms of fire behavior. Again, you start dropping much below 40%, you're getting 35, 30, or that 25 that they're predicting today. Then you start getting spot fires. Spot fires, what that is, you have an area you're burning and a spark, an ember flies out of yours across your fire guard into adjacent area and lights fires. That becomes a lot more probable when you have very low humidities. So that's something to be aware of. Equipment, so just got a picture here, a few of the equipment, there's equipment to light fires, the ignition equipment, picture there with a drip torch. I really like the drip torches. You can buy those, they're kind of expensive, although some counties, I don't know whether any of your extension agents or maybe the conservation district offices, sometimes they have these on hand that you can borrow them. The fuel that goes in that we use to burn with is usually a mixture of diesel fuel and gas. Typically maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the mixture ought to be diesel, and then the rest would be gas. You don't want to use too much gas, that's too volatile. But the drip torch is nice, and that fire drips off the end of the torch, and you get a nice continuous line that you're lighting, and it works quite well. Some people have used propane torches. I've seen those used. I'm not a fan of propane torches, but they can be used. One of the problems, it seems like they kind of whoosh, you whoosh as you go along, and you get more spots being lit on fire rather than a nice continuous line. Other ways of lighting, but those are kind of the key ones. So then if you have ignition equipment, we need something to suppress the fire. A minimum, I listed 200 gallons, 500 gallons of water would be probably better. We can have smaller units like the four-wheeler pictured there that might have, 20, 25 gallons of water on them. Those are good for, going along, putting out the backfire. But you need something with more water in case you have some more intense flames to deal with. Oh, there are backpack sprayers that you can buy. Allows you, usually carry 5 gallons of water. They allow you to get into areas maybe where you can't get in with the equipment. You have to walk into something creep under the trees, and you want to go in there and put it out. The picture here of a swatter, that's a bad name, but that's what they call it, because you don't swat fire. If you swat fire, you're just giving it oxygen and it'll keep burning. But it's just basically like a rubber flap there with a handle. You drag it on the ground and you smother out the fire with that. Again, on the backfire, where your light, maybe you have your area, maybe you've mowed it off, suppress the vegetation. You're lighting a backfire there meaning it's going into the wind. Well, it's going to try to go both directions, so it creeps with the wind. Well, as it does that, as it's creeping with the wind, you want to put that out. Well, the swatter can be used to do that, or something with water. Rakes can also be used to move mulch and stuff around. Various wetting agents, and one of the common things you can do is if you have a tank with water, you can add a little bit of soap to it, and that actually increases the surface tension, and it makes your water spread further, last longer. Mentioned fire retardants. You've probably seen on TV, they're fighting fires in California a lot of times. Airplanes going by and they're dropping this orange colored material out there in front of the fires. Well, that's probably a product. The trade name of that is Phos-Chek, and it's Phos because it's a phosphorus containing fertilizer almost. I think ammonium polyphosphate is one of the key ingredients that we have in Phos-Chek. And what it does, you put it on the vegetation, and it won't burn. The vegetation won't burn then, and it'll stay that way until you get some rain or some water that removes the phos, that material. So those can be used in some situations as well. Okay, so here's the fire guard. So again, we're going to talk about lighting a fire. Again, if we have a southwest wind, we have our fire guard then in the north and the east. Again, now here's an example of a fire guard. The only picture I put in are lots of different kinds of fire guards. This is the burned out one, where the area along this area had been mowed off, and then they burned it off. Could have used maybe what's called a double wet line technique, where you put water down on both sides of the area that you're going to burn and burn out in between. But this is a burned fire guard with area to be burned then on the right. Now, in the rule of thumb, though, is that fire guard ought to be 10 times the height of the vegetation. So if the vegetation's 2 feet tall, then your fire guard ought to be 20 feet to be safe. Even with that, I wouldn't want to run a fire, if I run a fire from the right in this picture, then toward that blackened area, I would probably not do that yet. I would come along here and light a fire again along here, let it creep this way for a ways before I run a head fire into it. Widen that black area just to be safe. Lots of types of fire guards. If you have CRP, old farm ground, probably, well, then we can mow, and we may actually till. Some people have a tilled area, maybe 20, 30 foot wide, and then a mowed out area beside it, and that becomes their fire guard. That's easier to do in those situations. Out in our pastures, a lot of times it's even difficult to mow, but one could do that. Another way we can sometimes create fire guards in a pasture is actually feed in those areas, like in the wintertime, spread some pellets out on the ground and so forth, and the animals will graze that, might graze off the vegetation as well. The only downside of that is if they leave too much manure, those old cow patties can smolder once they catch fire. So you have to be aware of that possibility. We can use natural barriers as much as possible, whether that's, again, roads and so forth, water, things along those lines. Even in areas that have a lot of rock and can be can be somewhat fire guards for us, although usually fire will creep through there. But fire guards are critically important for controlling our fires. Different kinds of fires. Here's an example of what's called a flank fire, where these individuals are walking, the fire away from the fire guard directly into the wind. In this case, though, it's important that these individuals are close enough so they can see each other. They're traveling at the same pace. You don't want to get somebody to get behind, because then they might get caught in a head fire. But that's one option. It's very safe. It takes a long time to do that, however, in terms of burning an area. Strip head fire, and this one is kind of a combination. I'll have another picture, because we use a strip head fire technique actually to widen out that fire guard, as I was talking about. So these types of burning techniques, we can control the size of the fire, somewhat the amount of smoke that's being put up. We can use that strip head fire to widen that fire break quite rapidly. And then this is a fairly safe technique. But again, labor and time to do them is involved. Here's the kind of getting toward the end of a ring fire technique. This is probably the most common technique that's used to burn. The ring fires, in safe method, it's fast, generates heat. Notice that some of this heat business and speed are listed both advantages and disadvantages. As long as you have a good fire break, though, that fast method, or the speed of the method is a real advantage. And again, when that fire comes in a ring fire, kind of burning from all sides, fire will kind of create its own wind, and it'll lift that smoke column right up in the middle of the column and lift it off the area. So again, here's the situation with areas in black there with the fire guard. Again, so you start widening this fire guard, and this is really what you do. You go back and forth, along those fire guards, and you're just widening out the area that's already burned, getting more black on the ground. This suggests at least 150 feet. And then, then the next step there, there's a picture, what does a backfire look like? And there's pretty good fuel load out there in this pasture. This fire's creeping along, low flames though, right? We could come along with the water, with sprayer and stuff, and we could put that out if we needed to, just about any time. It's not moving very fast. The flames are low and easy to put out. So then as you widen that fire break though, widen the area that's already burned, then, again, it's nice to have enough individuals. You can go both directions, so where they started up here, one person's going this way, the other one then is going to go this other direction. We're creating this ring. Notice that there's people down here. Sometimes those can be in the smoke. You gotta be a little careful, but have their water available to make sure that this fire is not going to, didn't creep across the fire guard. That's their purpose. And sometimes, people running back and forth with a four-wheeler, that's their job, doing that along those edges. So here's a head fire. Once you light that head fire, now you can get flames 10, 15, 20 feet in the air, maybe, depending on the amount of fuel. Move very quickly, particularly uphill, and pretty hard to put that out at that point in time. So now these people have completed this ring, and you got a head fire that goes across and rapidly completes the burn. One question that some people come up, and I should have pointed out with the earlier slide, is, well, what about wildlife species? They could be, got a ring of fire that could actually capture them in there and lose some animals. Well, what happen is as those people are starting to use their flank fires, again, along which those are along when they're coming along these edges here, you can stop. So you have fire like this, and if there's deer and things like that, they've got an area to escape. Birds, of course, they can fly out. The type of animals that are most likely to be damaged by burning are reptiles, snakes. Occasionally you might get a turtle, although again, if the fire moves quickly, I think that the shell and the turtle protects them most of the time. Only one I've ever seen was actually a snake, and that didn't bother me too much. I don't like snakes. Okay, post-burn. So the fire's done. Good time to make sure you clean up and repair your equipment if anything happened needs to be done. Evaluate your burn. Did it go as planned? Were there any problems encountered? Such as, communication. Did those walkie-talkies or whatever, two-way radios, did they work all the time, or were there issues? Were there escapes? Were there potential problems that you could need to figure out how to deal with that, do something different so that doesn't happen the next time. Keeping good records is important when you do burns, and so you have written down, how you did it, and what happened well, and what maybe something that didn't go so well. At the end of the season, it kind of goes back to your goals, what your goals were. Did the vegetation respond as you expected? Are you going to need a burn, sometime down the road again? How are you going to conduct it? And, you can start thinking about the next time around. Here in the Flint Hills, we have people that burn basically every year because of livestock gains. But other places, maybe people are burning maybe every 4th or 5th year, for instance, maybe to just keep the cedars off of a pasture. So it doesn't have to be as near as frequent. So prescribe, you have an objective. What is your goal? You need to plan well, you conduct the burn, and you evaluate the results. I did put on here this ksfire.org. It has a smoke model in it, but it only really works for counties here in the Flint Hills. But it's a website, has lots of information for individuals related to doing prescribed burns. It has links to the weather stations as well. So it's a good site to get information from if you need it. Anything related to prescribed burning. So prescribed burning, and we got safety. Kind of need to be concerned about safety issues for people conducting the burn and those around us. Where's that smoke going to go? We need to plan. And then, again, timing kind of depends on what your goals are. I didn't really talk about timing. We're talking here today pretty much about this kind of end of dormant season, late spring type burns. But there are other people conducting burns, now and during the, I'll say the growing season burn, or even getting into the fall, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. I think that concludes my talk. There's my contact information. Glad to answer maybe any questions that you have at this time.
All right. If we have any questions from the audience, you can either put them in the chat, or if you're brave enough, you can undo your video and ask it in person. If any of the agents also have questions, you guys can also ask those at this moment. Okay, first question. How long does a burn take on average?
Well, it depends on the size of the area you're burning, of course. If you have an 80-acre pasture or something like that, I think, again, and it also depends on maybe how much work did you do ahead of time. Did you prepare the fire break ahead of time, so that you can just go out that day and start lighting your backfire? A lot of times they create their backfires the same day. You just go along using water, and you light on the other side of the water you're putting down. But it can take a couple hours, on something even that size. Depends also, I think, on the experience of the individuals, how big your crew is. But yeah, it can take a considerable amount of time, maybe from as low as 1 hour up to several hours, depending on the size of the area. Again,
right.
back to weather, that's one thing, if it's going to take a long time, you need to keep constant eye, watching the weather, and make sure that the weather forecast, if there was a front scheduled to be coming in, maybe you light that fire mid-morning, but there's a front coming in later that day or in the afternoon. A lot of times we get a wind shift, and you should like to be done before that occurs. So that knowing how long it's going to take is important.
Okay, next question. If you want to control more of the woody species, when is the most recommended time to burn?
Well, most woody species basically need to be leafed out if we're going to do much damage to them. The exception to that would be eastern red cedar. It's an evergreen, and actually we can control eastern red cedar about any time of the year when we burn, assuming we can get enough of it desiccated. Doesn't have to desiccate the entire tree, it turns out. But, again, if red cedar was my primary target, and I wasn't concerned, I might burn a little bit earlier, even than right now, or even earlier, because the red cedars, as we get later into the spring, they start to get greener. I think the oil content goes up. There's more water in them, and sometimes you can sit there with a drip torch and you can't even light a cedar on fire. But let's say late February through the month of March, and that's a time like CRP needs to be burned generally prior to April 15th anyway. If cedars happen to be in there, hadn't been burned for a while, burning that time of the year works pretty well. Now these other woody plants, things like buckbrush or snowberry that you'd have in north central Kansas, they're lower growing. They kind of form little mottes or colonies of brush. They'll leaf out, here kind of mid-late April, and if you can wait till that late in the season to burn, you can do a lot of damage to buckbrush. Smooth sumac, another common shrub, though it's later. It's susceptible. If you could burn in June, you could control it, but it's pretty hard to burn in June. We can burn in late July and August and so forth, but June's pretty darn tough just because everything's so green. You just don't have enough litter there to carry it. Dogwood's kind of in between. So some of these plants, though, and some of our trees, hedge and locust and some of those sort of things, when they're seedlings and haven't developed much of a root system, if they're first coming into pasture, fire, in that late spring can do some damage. But if they've got much size to them, you might top kill it, but they're going to resprout. And actually, these summer fires might actually do more damage to trees like that than one, the spring burn. But basically, you got to think about they about have to be leafed out if you're going to do much damage.
Awesome. Okay, another question. How long do you need to patrol a pasture once the burn's complete?
Well, yeah, you want to make sure it's out. And again, usually immediately after the burn, you have individuals go around your perimeter, and what you're looking for are smoldering objects. If they're cow pies or whatever, you can take a rake, take them, pull, get them put out, or dump a lot of water on them. But a lot of times if you have woody material, particularly because woody material, even small branches, they sit there and they burn a long time. It takes more heat to get them started, but once they start, they burn for a long time. Drag them away from the perimeter, get them more toward the interior, so that you're cleaning up your perimeter that way. But then again, you hope, as you can see, if there's nothing smoldering out there, then the fire should be safe to leave. One thing, and I think I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, is one thing that is important. If you're burning an area that does have woody material in particular that could smolder and stays on fire, even though it's not real obvious, but the day after you burn, if the forecast changes, maybe the wind comes up, the humidity drops, and boy, it reignites some of that stuff, catching coals or something, something was slowly burning, that can spark up and start the fire again. So watching that weather forecast a day or so after you burn also is important. But so it takes some time to check out that perimeter. Again, most time if you're burning primarily, it's mostly grass. It's pretty straightforward and it's pretty obvious when it's out. There's you see very little smoke coming off of anything. So, but take some time. And again, if you aren't too far, you think it's done, okay, and maybe go back and check it on an hour later or something just to make sure.
Awesome. Well, if anybody else has any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt, and I'll let you guys know if you have any questions after this. If something comes up and you have a dire need to find out the answer, you're more than welcome to email any of the agents as well as Walter. We definitely will get back to you on those questions and let you know the answers. And if you are watching this as a recording later on after the meeting, you guys are also more than welcome to email those questions to us and we'll get back to you as soon as possible.
I did send Brad a copy, PDF, of the presentation that you can probably get to people too if they want to take some notes on it or whatever as they're watching the recording in particular. Yes.
Yeah, those should have been in your inbox. If you did provide us with your email, I should have had your email. It should be in your inbox if you want to go check. I emailed those out before we started this morning. Okay. Well, I think I don't see any more questions. I don't, do you, Justine?
Nope, I don't
Okay.
see any.
Okay. Well, I did just post into the chat a Qualtrics survey, just for you guys to fill out for us this time. This is just quick survey about yourself and a few questions about the presentation, and then a little bit about future programming. It takes 2 minutes to fill out. We would appreciate it if you clicked on that link and filled it out. It helps us know if our programming is effective, and also helps us with future programming if you have any ideas on that. Also, with that, let me share this real quick. We will be back on next week with our virtual programming next Thursday, April 8th at 10 a.m. same time next week. We'll have Dr. Keith Harmony on, and he'll be discussing some pasture weed controls. I'm not sure exactly which pasture weeds he's going to be talking about, but I believe it's mainly going to be focused on our north central area of Kansas, some of the big problems that we're having in our area. So again, we will plan on seeing you next week. If you have any questions, you can contact us by email or phone at each of our offices. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll check off then.
Yep, thanks, Walter.
Thank you, Walt.